Cherki, Reinders, Aït-Nouri. Khaldoun Al-Mubarak remembered the pin to his bank account, and he's spending big. Every club has its ups and downs. For most teams, it's normal not to win a title, but not for Man City. When City fall, they don't stay down for long. They aren't united, they reload, they rebuild, and they come back swinging harder than ever. To the outside, it looks chaotic, but they are spending wisely, because for a few years, they didn't invest, trusting the same core to continue winning. But it was clear then new players were needed, hence why they have brought in some big names, new faces. This is what City does. When they lose, they don't sit around feeling sorry for themselves. They spend. Their failures never last long because their rebuild isn't done quietly. It's done in front of everyone to see. Spending has been a big part of City's philosophy ever since their financial takeover. They wanted to sign top players who were already good but had the potential to get even better. Now, of course, it took them some time to get this philosophy right. In the beginning, they were spending big, but it wasn't always the smartest. They broke the British transfer record by signing Brazilian star Robinho from Real Madrid. Now, at the time, Robinho was a massive name. He was a Galactico signing from Madrid. He was their top goal scorer in the 2009 season, and he had even finished in the top 10 for the Ballon d'Or. So for City to get a player with this level of star power was huge, but the performances didn't match the hype. One star wasn't going to be enough to turn City's fortunes around. Then came the summer of 2009, and City went all in. They spent over £100 million on big names like Gareth Barry, Roque Santa Cruz, Kolo Touré, Emmanuel Adebayor, Carlos Tevez, and Julian Lescott. It was a clear message to the rest of the Premier League. Manchester City were serious about becoming one of the best. Signing Tevez specifically was a power play by the Abu Dhabi group. Tevez had spent 2 seasons on loan at Manchester United. Despite his great performances for the Reds though, reports suggested that Tevez was dissatisfied with the fact that he was not offered a permanent contract, and the fact that he was dropped from the team in certain matches. Fans chanted, "Fergie, sign him up." But Ferguson refused to talk about the subject. Now, United did eventually offer Tevez a deal, and their chief executive David Gill had actually suggested that the Tevez situation was going to be resolved by early June of 2009. That ended up not being the case. Tevez's advisors informed the club that he no longer wished to play for Manchester United. Instead, he went to their cross-city rivals, Manchester City, becoming the first player to move from United to City since Terry Cook did in 1999. City actually put up a blue billboard that said, "Welcome to Manchester," with Tevez in the background. It was the Abu Dhabi group making a statement. Now, initially, the team still struggled as City realized that signing a bunch of good players doesn't automatically translate into wins. Despite having so many stars that were assembled at a great cost, City were still disorganized and going nowhere. In an attempt to take the team to the next level, the club sacked Mark Hughes, a manager who, to be fair, wasn't selected by the Abu Dhabi group. He was just in charge when the financial takeover was done, kind of like what happened with Steve Bruce at Newcastle. Hughes ended up being replaced by Roberto Mancini, and it was under the Italian that City began one of the most exciting and successful periods in their club's history. In Mancini's first season, they played some nice football and narrowly missed out on a place in the Champions League. Seeing progress though, City invested more. They signed Yaya Toure, David Silva, Jerome Boateng, James Milner, and Alexander Kolarov. As I stated earlier, they were looking for players who were already good but had room to grow. Yaya Toure, for example, was already a European champion with Barca, but it was obvious that he had another ceiling that he could reach. Same thing for David Silva, who had done very well with Valencia and dominated with Spain on the international stage. With even better players and a good manager, City became stronger. They ended up making it to the FA Cup final, their first major final in over 30 years. And to get there, they actually had to beat their city rivals, Manchester United, in the semi-final. It was a huge moment. City hadn't knocked United out of a cup since 1975. The winning goal came from Yaya Toure. In the final, City faced Stoke, and once again, it was Yaya Toure who stepped up and scored the only goal of the game. After 35 long years, Manchester City had finally won a major trophy. Mancini had once promised to take that banner down, in reference to a banner at Old Trafford that mocked City's trophy drought, and now he had done it. The dark cloud that had hung over the club for decades was gone. Everything had changed. The fans finally started to believe, and the success didn't stop there. City finished third in the Premier League that season, earning a spot in the Champions League for the first time. It was very clear, Manchester City were no longer dreaming, they were building a real-life dynasty. What made City so good though is that the investments didn't stop there. They continued the momentum by bringing in more top players. They signed Samir Nasri, Clichy, and most importantly, Sergio Aguero. Aguero was another statement signing, a striker who the entire world wanted, but the Argentine chose City. A decision that we will see was the best one he could have ever made. Manchester City had never been stronger as they started the 2012 season in commanding form. They beat Tottenham 5-1 at White Hart Lane and humbled Manchester United by slapping them 6-1 at Old Trafford. The loss gave us one of the most iconic celebrations of all time. City were now becoming a dominant side in English football and really making some noise. And of course, how can I talk about City that season and not bring up the most iconic moment?
City are still alive here. Balotelli, Aguero!
The goal alone was exceptional. Anytime a team comes back, especially in the dying minutes of the game, it's a joy to see. But the context of the goal makes the story so much more fascinating. That goal not only ended up giving City the Premier League title, but it also ended a 44-year title drought. Then you add in the fact that this was Aguero's first season, big money spent, a lot of pressure, and that's how he responded. A moment so iconic that they made it a statue. After winning the Premier League title in a dramatic fashion in 2012, City were now the kings of England, and the feeling around the club was electric. But instead of standing still, they went back to the transfer market, looking to build on that success. Roberto Mancini was backed again. A lot of money was spent in the summer. City brought in Jack Rodwell from Everton, Scott St. Clair from Swansea, Maicon from Inter Milan, Nastasic from Fiorentina, and Javi Garcia from Benfica. Now these were solid signings, but none of them really turned into game changers. So the team ended up not improving, and by the end of the season, it showed. They lost games they should have won, they dropped points, and fell behind in the title race. They ended the season in second place, well behind Manchester United. It felt like a big step backwards. As a result, they began to let go of a few big names. Adebayor went to Tottenham for £5 million. Now he had initially gone on loan to them in the 2011-2012 season, but he had done so well that Spurs signed him permanently. And Mancini had already made it clear in August of 2011 that Adebayor was not a part of his plans. Then you had Adam Johnson, who was sold to Sunderland, Nigel de Jong, who went to AC Milan, and Mario Balotelli, one of their most famous players, was also sold to Milan in January of that year. Altogether, those sales brought in around £39 million. But even though the club had money and they had spent a lot, they had lost their crown. So the club decided it was time for a change. Mancini was sacked and Pellegrini was brought in to start a new chapter. City now had more money, ambition, and a plan, but they needed to get smarter about how they spent it. But of course, they still had to spend, because in order to give Pellegrini the best chance of success, they had to bring in players. So the summer of 2013, City brought in a ton of guys that Pellegrini requested. They brought in Fernandinho, who ended up becoming a rock for City's midfield for years to come. They brought in Jesus Navas, a speedy winger from Sevilla, Alvaro Negredo, Jovetic, and then late in the window they brought in Demichelis, an experienced defender from Atletico Madrid. These signings gave the squad fresh energy and depth, especially in the attack. Pellegrini now had more options and flexibility. At the same time, City cleared out some players who were no longer a part of their future. Tevez, who had been so good for the team, left for Juventus. Maicon, who had struggled with injuries, returned back to the Serie A. And then other veteran players like Kolo Touré, Wayne Bridge, and Roque Santa Cruz all left on free transfers or small deals. It was a cleanup job and a refresh at the same time. Pellegrini was building his own team, and it worked. The new look City played fast, fluid football, and they actually won the Premier League. For the bulk of the season, they were actually third, but in the business end, they stepped up while Liverpool choked. That season, they also lifted the League Cup, completing a domestic double. Their success sent a clear message. When City falls short, they don't panic. They spend big, but they spend smart. And more often than not, it brings results. Now, their next big haul came when Pep arrived. Of course, some signings were made before that, like Kevin De Bruyne. KDB was a perfect signing, not just because of what he achieved at the club, but because he fit the philosophy that I was discussing earlier. He was one of the most attacking midfielders in the world, but he was still at a level where he could improve so much more. As we will see later in the video, that same principle is being applied again by City to its new players. Now for Pep, City initially signed Claudio Bravo from Barcelona for the keeper position. They brought in Leroy Sané, who was an exciting winger from Schalke, and Ilkay Gundogan from Dortmund. They also technically signed Bernardo Silva later in the season, but he wouldn't join City until the following season. And as usual, City also sold some of their older players, like Yaya Toure. You just know Yaya and Pep were never going to work together again after their beef at Barca. The spending, however, led to nothing in that first season. Despite all the hype around Pep and these new guys, City finished third in the league and won trophies trophy list. But as I've been telling you guys all video, City don't accept being mediocre. They bounce back. They spend more than they had ever done, and they brought in the pieces that Pep required. The spending was focused on building a rock-solid spine for the team. They brought in Laporte, a dominant center back who came in the winter transfer window. Big money was spent on this guy. In the summer, they had purchased John Stones, so a ton of money was spent just on getting good center backs. Then they had gone Benjamin Mendy, an attacking fullback who had been unreal at Monaco. They also had brought in Kyle Walker, aka Lincoln Burrows from Prison Break. These two were going to buff up the wingback position. Then Bernardo Silva, the creative magician, was now officially a part of the team. And City knew all about him because he had terrorized them in the Champions League when he was on Monaco. Ederson came in as Pep wanted a keeper that was good with his feet, and they also brought in Danilo, a versatile defender. The investments gave Pep exactly what he needed: a way better back line, more creativity in the midfield, and a goalie that could actually pass. And the gamble paid off. City not only won the league, but they shattered 100 points. Every week these guys were breaking some kind of new record. After that season, City were so dominant that they had to pick and choose their signings a lot more. They didn't need as much spending because the foundation was already set. Just here and there they had to pick up a player who they felt could elevate the team to another level, and to keep churning around the players so that nobody got complacent. Mahrez, for example, was brought in the summer of 2018 to beef up the attack even more. Then City spent a good chunk of change in the summer of 2019, bringing in Rodri for £63 million and bringing in Joao Cancelo from Juventus. Again, they were spending, but instead of a ton of players, they were spending big money on specific players. I also want to use Rodri as an example because a lot of money was spent on him, but he wasn't that established at all. He was a good holding midfielder who transformed into a Ballon d'Or winner under Pep. So much for the narrative that Pep doesn't develop players. Seriously, man, I gotta get off Twitter. I lose brain cells every time I log in. Follow me there though. But like I said, at this point they were just fine-tuning the team. Money was being spent, but unlike those early years, it was being spent sporadically, and it was being spent smartly. In the summer of 2020, for example, City went all out for Ruben Dias, a center back who ended up anchoring the side to a treble. Now, there were some misses over the years. Mangala wasn't great. Grealish never really fulfilled the massive price tag that was paid for him. He did help them win the treble, but individually he never performed like a player worth £100 million. But again, there was more hits than misses. Take one of the greatest signings City have ever made in Erling Haaland. City needed a striker desperately, and they casually signed the best number 9 out there. When you consider his output, his age, and his attributes, there really isn't a better striker on the planet. The man almost won another Golden Boot in a season where it was a down year for him. Now, what happened over the years though is that as City kept winning more and more with their core, they got a bit complacent because the new signings slowed down and the exits increased. Mahrez was sent to Saudi Arabia. Palmer was sold to Chelsea. Ferran Torres and Sterling had left a few years earlier. Then Julian Alvarez, a player who had been so vital for them for 2 seasons, was sold without a replacement. On paper, they had made a huge profit as they had turned Alvarez from this hype talent from River Plate to flat out one of the best strikers on the market. But having money wasn't as important as actually replacing the output that he brought. City's big marquee signing during this time of departures was Guardiola, who was a defender, although he did his part and more when it came to providing output. There were actually times in the 2025 season where the Croatian defender was flat out City's best attacker. With City relying too much on the core of players that they had signed years ago, 2025 provided a much needed time for an overhaul. The first big signing was Marmoush, who was more or less the Alvarez replacement, a versatile player that can play anywhere in the attack, a guy who gets goals for fun. Despite joining in a winter transfer window, he immediately showed why he was worth the big bucks. Scored the goal of the season, got a hat-trick against a very informed Newcastle side. It's a shame that City hadn't signed him in the summer. Then you have Husinov and Vitor Hayes, 2 young defenders that were signed to hopefully anchor the future of City's defense. Because as good as Ruben Dias and John Stones have been, it was time to start planning for the future. Although I do think one of those guys will be playing next to Guardiola in a back 4. Then you have Reinders, who came in as the Gundogan replacement, a midfielder that can play as a 6, as an 8, or even as a 10. Someone who can score, create, and actually carry the ball. Go look at the goals this guy was scoring for a very mid-Milan side. He's identical to Gundogan, someone that can pull out a moment of brilliance in a big game just like the German used to. And it's so good that he's here because relying on an aging Gundogan and Bernardo Silva in big 2026 is crazy. It's not 2023 anymore. Speaking of moving on, City also had to buff the attacking midfield position after not renewing Kevin De Bruyne. And boy, did they find a worthy successor. Cherki is one of the most naturally gifted footballers I have ever seen. The ball sticks to his feet like glue. And even though he looks like he loves a good couscous, he can turn any defender inside out. He's equally good with both feet just like Kevin De Bruyne, and he can make moments of magic just like the Belgian used to. Now, of course, KDB was a bit more mechanical. He was like a robot calculating the angles and putting in crosses that had more curve than Kim Kardashian. Cherki is more more like a street baller. He plays with flair, with magic. Imagine Mahrez, a little fatter, but two-footed. City didn't just buff up the midfield, they also upgraded positions where they lacked depth, like the left back position, by signing Aït-Nouri. City didn't have a ton of options here, rotating between Ake and Guardiola, who are both center backs, while Nico O'Reilly did get some opportunities towards the back end of the 2025 season. But I believe Pep has realized that it's time to go back to normal fullbacks. Aït-Nouri is phenomenal on the ball. Seriously, look at him dribbling. He plays like a futsal player. Just imagine him and Cherki both together in a tight space. They're gonna embarrass teams. Aït-Nouri actually played as a left wing back in Wolves' 5-back system, and he was one of their best players. He was their most creative player, had the most touches in the attacking third, and he had the most assists. He had 12 goal contributions in all competitions, which is quite impressive given the fact that Wolves spent the bulk of the season fighting relegation. When Matheus Cunha was injured, Aït-Nouri stepped up. Wolves won 6 games in a row during that time. He scored and assisted in a win against Tottenham and then created 5 chances against Ipswich. His left-footed crosses and fast runs down the left-hand side caused problems for every opponent. In fact, only 10 players in the Premier League had tried more dribbles than him, because Aït-Nouri isn't just a typical wingback. He's very technical, can use both feet, and can play well in different positions. I remember in certain games, Gary O'Neill used him as a number 10, because this guy, he's like João Cancelo, creative, tricky, and very good in tight spaces. Even for the mighty Manchester City, it was time for a rebuild, a move to the next era. 6 Premier League titles in 7 years, made people think that a title is guaranteed. It's not. You still have to work hard, spend smartly, and stay ahead of the game. Well, City are doing that. They're laying the foundation again, just like they did in 2012 and 2017. Now, sadly, one player who won't be a part of this new era is KDB, but it's fine because his legacy is already set. To see the story of one of the greatest midfielders to ever grace the Premier League, you have to watch this documentary right here.